Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar on how to use AI and skill intelligence to grow your people and your organization. Joining us today at this special webinar, we have Ben Eubanks, Principal Analyst and Chief Research Officer from Lighthouse Research, and Henry Vasquez, Product Manager here at Cornerstone. Here on the screen, you should be able to see the webinar slides. You should also be able to see various application widgets or engagement tools available for use. These are resizable and movable for you to make the most out of your desktop experience. You can expand your slide area or maximize it to full screen by clicking on the arrows in the top right-hand corner. Some networks cause slides to advance more slowly than others, so logging off your VPN is recommended. The final 15 minutes of this webinar will be available for a Q&A. If you have any questions during this section, you can submit them through the Q&A widget. We will try to answer these during the webcast, but if a more detailed answer is needed or if we run out of time, it will be answered later via email. But please know that we capture all of your questions. And finally, the webinar is being recorded and an on-demand version will be made available. And now I would like to hand it over to you, Ben and Henry. Ben, you can take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chelsea. And hey, everybody, so glad to be here with you. I'll give you the quick about me. I'll let Henry tell you something fun about himself, and then we'll dive into the conversation for today because I've been looking forward to this so much. So as Chelsea mentioned, I'm the Chief Research Officer at Lighthouse Research and Advisory. I spend my days plumbing the depths of what it takes to create a high-performing talent function, a learning function, an HR function, all those pieces and pull them together. It's so much fun, honestly, because I started my career in HR as a practitioner, and now I get a chance to influence and support and educate other leaders like yourselves through this kind of format, through the reports and other kinds of things we get to do. So it's so much fun, and I really enjoy it. And you'll hear some good stories, some good data points, things like that as we go through today. And Henry, give us really quick about you, sir.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Good to see you again, by the way. This is not our first rodeo together. My name is Henry Vasquez. Lead a team of global product managers here at Cornerstone focused on skills and career development. I also work with our AI team, the Skills Graph team. I joined Cornerstone in 2018, and I was hired here to create a whole new platform for employee skills and capabilities. And it needed to be something that was modern and AI first. And now, 2 years later, I'm proud to say that we have a product that is generally available and used by hundreds of customers around the world. So it's been quite a journey, and now we're talking about it.
I'm excited about it, honestly, and I can't wait to hear. I know you have a story or two probably to pop into the conversation about some of those customers and what they're doing with it. So I'm excited for those things as well. So let's go ahead and dive into it. And for those of you out there that don't know me or haven't heard me speak before, I love stories because they help us connect to the world and connect to the ideas and things. We're going to talk about some things today that are a little bit less tangible, we'll just say. And so I love stories because they help us connect to those things and those themes. So a couple of years ago, we were traveling through Atlanta, and my wife said, "Hey, there's a 5K there locally. I'd love to try that out. You watch the kids, and I'm gonna go run." And so we went over there. She ran. She had a good race, and we're sitting there afterwards at the little after party, relaxing. We said, "Hey, we're going to do a contest. We're going to have a watermelon seed spitting contest." And one of our kids said, "Hey, I want to do that, but I'm nervous. Mom, will you do it with me?" And so I'm laughing because there's no way she's going to do this. She says, "Yeah, sure." So she jumps into it. And of all the people that do this silly contest, my wife ends up winning that. She did okay in the 5K. No, didn't place, but she ends up winning this watermelon seed spitting contest. And I love that story because in the work we get to do day to day and the people we work with, we may think we know what all their skills are. We may think we know what their strengths are. But sometimes they have other things that are a little bit under the surface, and we don't ever see them until they have a chance to come out, or unless we have some other way of digging into them beyond just the day-to-day kind of passing by, and even in a virtual sense today, passing by someone. We don't get a chance to understand what all those are. So today we're going to talk about skills. We're talking about understanding the capabilities of your people. We're going to dive deep into those conversations. And I love that story because it really ties together and hits home for me. It makes me smile because it's a reminder that even this person who I've been married to for many years apparently has these hidden talents that I had no idea she's been hiding them all this time. And so next time we go out there, I'll have a ringer to throw into the watermelon seed spitting contest and give us a chance to win that. So let's take the fun, let's transition over to something a little more serious. I want to share this with you. I saw this chart a couple of years ago, and it has stuck with me. Every time I think about this, it makes me pause. So this is a visual representation of the value of the S&P 500 companies. So a portion of their value. So if you remember your accounting class in college, we look at a balance sheet. We have tangible assets and intangible assets, right? These things that are physical that we can put our hands on, that we can use or sell if we had to, and these other things that are harder to put our hands on. They're copyrights and their patents and their things like that. This chart here actually represents the shift and growth in intangible value for those S&P 500 companies. So the 500 biggest companies operating within the United States. In the 70s, that number was 70%. The vast majority of the value in those companies was in physical plants and products and inventory and things like that. Right? A few years ago, when they did this measurement again, 2015, they found that had shrunk to a small portion of that. It's flipped. It's inverted, essentially. And this group right here is actually what we see here is that today, the vast majority of that value for those companies is actually in their intangible assets. And I'm going to make the argument, because for a long time that's included things like their goodwill and their brand recognition and those kinds of things that, again, are pretty fuzzy. But I'm going to make the argument that the skills of their people, the capabilities of their people, actually fit into that puzzle as well, that makes a piece of the value of these companies. And Henry, I'd love to get your take on that. This is just kind of my way of tweaking that research a little bit and adding in the skills piece to everything else. But you get to see this front and center when you're working with companies and they're thinking about the value of the skills that are inside their business. Would you agree that that's part of that kind of intangible value of the company as well?
Oh, 100%. I bet if you could get this bar for 2021, it would be even higher because of all the, shift to remote work and that sort of thing. What you see is, even in the acquisition market, when you look at M&A and you look at venture capital, a lot of companies are being bought, and you look at their balance sheets and you go, okay, where are the plants and the materials, and where is all of that? Where's the inventory that you're buying? And you hear about things like acqui-hires. At least within the tech industry, this number is even more extreme. And what you see is that, and we did this, actually, I can empathize with this here at Cornerstone, is we acquired a company primarily for their people and how smart they were and some of the IP that they had created. But really, if it was just the data and just the technology, it wouldn't really work. We needed both, and that was kind of part of the deal. So we're seeing this all the time. And people would say, well, people come and go and they leave organizations. Not everything is written down. It's much more complex than that. The knowledge, the intangible information, it's not just, facts that are written down or data inside of your corporate systems. It's the fact that when you go talk to somebody, they know a person who knows an answer, and then that person knows another person who knows an answer, and it's this knowledge graph of humans, right? And it all kind of holds itself together. You lose one, well, you might lose what's in that person's head, but you don't lose the sort of routing system that exists. And so that's what makes skills so important and so resilient as a form of value.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. And I like that example too, of having that daisy chain of, I know a person and I know what they can do and they know what they can do, and connecting all those dots together. It reminds me of recruiting this position years ago, this highly specialized position. There were 10 or 15 people in the world who were qualified to do this specific job. And we had sent out a message to kind of like the Hail Mary, like, we are getting close, we've got to find this person. And when finally I got a referral back, I followed that link all the times people had forwarded that and shared that with people. And we had 9 different people who had shared that with their networks finally connect that one person. So one of the things you talked about value, you talked about the connections there. And that's one of the things that I am a big, big advocate for. So for those of you out there listening into this, if you haven't stopped to think about it in this way, I would argue that skills are this currency we can use within the business to solve different problems. For example, obviously hiring today, every single company I'm talking to is struggling with certain skill sets, trying to find certain people. They're trying to find, that's a great example of that. That's very top of mind for us. This fits into learning as well. This fits into talent management and succession and mobility and all those kinds of things. All these different use cases that fit into our buckets, the things that we care about as HR, as talent, as learning leaders, all those things that fall under purview. Skills give us a chance to tie in and to try to solve that and try to bring some value. And one of the ways I put it, if this makes sense to you, is if I asked one of your accounting leaders, one of your finance leaders, I said, hey, that office chair over there in the corner, when did we buy that? What's it worth today? How much can we get? What's fair market value? They could give me those numbers pretty quickly because they have that information on a chair that someone sits on in the waiting room. But we don't have much insight into the skills of our people, nearly as much as the insights they have into other things like that, that I'd argue don't matter as much in one little piece. Our people are worth a lot more than a piece of office furniture or something like that. And the skills they bring, as with the stories that you were sharing a minute ago, Henry, some of the skills are so highly specialized, you literally can't get them anywhere else because that only exists in their head. So we've got to be thinking about that through that lens and thinking about it, again, as a currency. And I like the idea of currency, not just because it helps us to apply it to different places because it's accepted in other places, but also because it's by nature fluid. It flows from one place to the other as it's needed. Just like in the business, if we need these skills today, we need different skills tomorrow, we have the chance to move those through learning, through training, through hiring, all those different levers we can pull to try to access the right kinds of skills that are out there for our people. Okay. Anything to add there before we jump on, Henry?
Yeah, sometimes we'll kind of make this point about skills as a currency, and then people will say, well, that's a little abstract and a little heady and kind of a weird way. They have a hard time relating to it somehow. And then I'll just say, well, what was the currency before skills was just job titles, right? I mean, that's kind of the way, at least within talent, that's the way we kind of talked about things and kicked things around. You look at workforce planning, you look at job architectures and leveling, compensation. You look at even like the way training is thought of, like how do we decide who gets trained what? So much of it was like the regime of job titles as kind of I think of as like the predecessor. And so anything that in your mind you think, oh, job title was like the shortcut that we used. That was the currency that we were kind of like kicking around. Oh, let me give you a BA. Let me give you an executive assistant. Like we're kicking these job titles around. Skills is that now, right? So just go back through all of those things again and think about your levels, think about your workforce planning, think about your training, your recruiting. Instead of looking at titles, you're looking for skills. And that's the easiest way to understand like what we mean when we're talking about this currency.
Yes. And I was going to say, some of the things people hate most about job titles and job descriptions is that they are so vague. They can fit in all these different buckets, and skills allows that at a really granular level, at a really specific level. Because if we had a catch-all job description years ago. I don't know if any of you do this, but you can, wave virtually at me if you do. But we had a technician job that if we had something to hire for that didn't fit anything else, that's the thing we used, and we just adapt it and tweak it and add in the skill or take out that degree, and that would be our kind of catch-all for things because we didn't have a specific way to hire just for the skills. We had to hire for some job title, even if it was something that we had never hired for before. So we just use that technician one on the shelf as we'll just take that one and adapt it and change it and fit it into whatever we actually are trying to hire for in this situation. So I love that. So one of the things we've done in our research in the last 12 to 18 months, we did this the first time almost 2 years ago, and the second time this year is kind of a refresh to figure out how we're doing, what's happening, is we ask a lot of questions around how companies like you actually measure the skills of their people. How do you identify what those are? How do you know how strong they are or the degree that someone has that? Is it just a very basic level, or are they proficient at it? All those kinds of things. We gather a lot of information about that because I keep hearing from leaders that say, I wish I had more insight into what our people have, what they can do, what their capabilities are, because if I knew those things, I'd love to tap into them. to make that feel a little more personal, to make it feel more connected to you, by the way, if you want to understand what I mean when I say that, think about how it felt when you got your job offer to do the job you're doing today. When someone said, we want to hire you for what you bring to the table. Well, that feels nice. But if you know the skills of your people, you can tap into them all over again. You can recreate that feeling when you say, Henry is really great at X, and we need him to do X for this project over here. So we're going to tap into him and ask him to volunteer for that or support that, or we're going to move him into that new assignment. Well, it recreates that feeling of being desired and appreciated and wanted. And for a lot of us, thinking about how do we keep our people today, how do we retain them, that is a really powerful feeling that should not, don't undersell how that feels to your people, because it really does matter. Transitioning back. So what we do is we actually look at the different ways companies do this. And you can see rated number 1 through number 4. That's not how great they are. That's how frequently companies use them. So the most common way that employers are identifying the skills of their people today is through a manager saying, yeah, I think he's got that, or I think she has that, or maybe they have that, maybe they don't. Managers are actually using their own observations to figure that out. The second most often is some sort of assessment or test. We're trying to figure out how strong that is. 360s and asking your peers, and then last is self-reported. And I plotted those here because normally when I first started reporting on this, I just reported 1 through 4 in terms of popularity, and that was it. But I started plotting it here because I like how this gives us some thought around how quickly we can put these things into place and how accurate they are. Because I hear some people say, well, we obviously start with employee self-reported, but others shy away from that. It's like, well, people are terrible judges of what skills they have. They're not going to be accurate. They're not going to be honest. We can have all kinds of arguments about what they're going to do or not, but having them plotted out here allows us to see if we need to do something quickly. We've got to really quickly ramp up. We just need to have something there. Well, it's not bad to have someone self-report because we get something quickly, even if it's not 100% accurate. If we need something super accurate, we transition to, okay, maybe we need to do assessments for a certain type of skill or a certain type of job or a certain job family. But again, that takes a little more time. So we start trading those things off. And because we know in a real world, it's never one variable. It's always 25 variables. And we got to figure out which ones matter the most. And I'm sharing this because when in our research, as we're looking at the companies and the tools and the resources, and I'm going to pitch this over to Henry to weigh in, because I know that he and the team actually have something similar to this they've created internally over there that also does some of this. What we see when it comes to AI models and things like that is that it can bring a different perspective to this and allow us to do something pretty quickly relative to some of the other methods. And also it's pretty darn accurate. So is it absolutely perfect every time, never misses? No, that's highly unlikely. However, the more data we feed it, the more information we provide, the better the algorithm gets at determining someone's skills, at figuring out what's next, and so on. So, Henry, I'd love to get your take on this. Is that in the right place, do you think? And what is your take on how that fits into this bigger picture?
Yeah, I love this topic. Verification of skills is kind of a juicy one. What I would say is that the data you're looking at, like verification is really in the eye of the beholder. That's kind of how I look at it. Who's asking the question? Is someone trying to do L&D planning around the interests of the organization? Okay, well, how proficient someone doesn't affect their compensation in that context, right? So it's fine if you use this lower verification, highly scalable and easy way to gather data. Or are you looking at, I need strict qualification for someone working in a factory under a regulated ISO something, standard, and you better get it right. Don't mess with that, right? Don't even use AI for that.
Forever.
Yeah, so I always say that verification is in the eye of the beholder. Who's asking the question? And that's why it's important to gather signals from all these different areas. What do we find with AI is that I think of it as kind of like a barbell or a dumbbell. AI is really good at one extreme end, which is it can quickly, way faster than humans, scan people, profiles, work activity, etc., and make a really good guess around people's skills and their proficiency. And that's on like the purely scalable side. And then on the complete opposite side, it's really good at crunching all of these numbers together into a composite score. So like it has both of those extremes. It's missing sort of the middle. That's where all these human activities come in. But when we look at it, you get both of those benefits. You get that scalable side, but also the well, what do you do if you have 10 data points that are a mix of all of these things on the screen? At Cornerstone, we have something called the predicted proficiency level. And it actually is an AI model that mashes together all these different signals and comes up with a best guess and a confidence score. So, and that is more accurate than any one of these individual signals. So AI has a huge role in this kind of process.
Awesome. I love, what did you call it again? Predictive what?
The predicted level. And the whole concept, the framework we have is called the confidence ladder. And it basically takes everything that you have here and it says, you know, what's the confidence level of that input? So like a verified work experience that's corroborated by peers, where you have demonstrated outcomes, is like the gold standard. That's like what every recruiter in the world's looking for, right? It's not that you have the degree or the certification or you took the course. It's like you've applied knowledge that specifically uses that skill. A bunch of people were involved. You can like talk about it as a key bullet on your CV and someone can dig into it and learn all about it, right? Demonstration of using the skill in work. And then you go all the way down the list to like AI scans some resume, you know, as like the lowest piece. Somewhere in between, you've got things like training, human review, endorsements, peers, you know, feedback, having an expert rate or assess you versus having some rando person, right? So these are all on different rungs of the confidence ladder. We use that visual as a way to tell people, okay, this is how the predicted level makes sense of all of these different data points.
Yeah, awesome. I love that. I love the idea of the ladder too, in terms of confidence for someone visualizing that. As you go higher on that ladder, you get more specific things. And as you said, the top rung is, this is someone has seen you do it. We know you can do this thing because someone else has verified that you can do this thing by seeing you do this thing. That gives us a lot of confidence, that person's ability to step out and take that on if we want to assign someone a new job, for instance, or we want to give them a project to lead, or whatever other example you want to throw out there, something where we need some confidence in it. If it's lower on that spectrum, maybe it's, we're going to add you to the team so you can be in the mix and you can contribute and you can support and you can be a player, but you're not going to be the one leading this thing because we haven't yet verified enough about your skills and your abilities to feel confident in that. So I love the idea of the confidence piece of that as it fits into that bigger picture. One of the other things I'll say, sometimes when I talk about this, I have another graphic that I use, similar to what you were saying there about it kind of vectoring in on what the true composite score is using a model. If you've ever, pilots in a plane, when they're trying to find some new destination, they're plotting a destination, they use vectors to figure out which direction they're going. They'll go this way a little bit, and they'll go that way a little bit. If they're trying to avoid a storm, they'll plot that in, because it's never an exact circle. It's always short trips in one direction along one line. Anyway, it's easier when I have the picture up to show. But essentially, I say, okay, this is one layer, and this is the second layer, and this is the third layer. And wherever those things start to intersect, as you're saying, that composite score paints the picture of what someone's true capabilities are that we can hang our hat on. We can make our decisions based on. We have confidence in those things. So, awesome. So we talked a lot about the use cases and the value and things like that within our bubbles as talent leaders, as HR leaders, as learning leaders, the things that we care about. You tell us that you can give us a tool to make us better at succession, we get all fired up. You tell us that you have some way of helping us to get better at predicting what makes a good mentor match, or pairing someone, or assigning someone learning content, or picking the right person for a hiring decision based on skills. Any one of those things would make us start to jump up and down in our seat a little bit, because we're excited about the problems that allows us to solve in our world. But sometimes those problems aren't big enough for someone outside of our bubble. So someone who's in the C-suite, or someone who's in another level of leadership, telling them that we can suddenly make the right decisions on hires, they may not care about that as much as we do, because they don't understand the impact that can have. And so one of the things I talk about when I'm giving advice on how to take these ideas we're talking about today and to try to tie them together in a way to present to your leadership, to get buy-in, to get support, to build that business case, is to make sure that we're talking about that in language that they care about. So the things that we care about, we already know. But the things that your leaders care about could be things like competitiveness. It could be stability as an organization. If you're seeing a lot of turmoil, maybe stability matters to you and to your leaders. It could be market performance. We're going to outpace them because we can identify the skills faster than they can. It could be agility. The next time something big happens like a pandemic, we'll be able to shift more quickly because we really get what our people can do, and we can lean on them where appropriate to allow them to be the experts that they are. So looking at those kinds of things and the different language they speak, essentially, knowing how to tap into that. If you're trying to take the thing you're talking about today and you go to them and say, we can identify all the skills we have, and you may not get quite the excitement you're looking for. But if you were to go to your leaders and say, we're going to analyze and understand the skills of our people so that X, Y, Z, some of those examples I just gave you, I think that's really, really important and gives you additional credibility. It shows that you are thinking about the things they care about, the things that keep them up at night. Henry, I'd love to get your thought on this, because one of the things I tell leaders sometimes when they're trying to figure out where do we start with something like this, because it can be so big to put your arms around, is I say, go to some of your leaders and ask them what keeps them up at night. Ask them what things they're worried about, because you'll often find some connection back to, in this case, the skills of your people and understanding those better that you can use to apply that. What do you think?
Yeah, it's funny, as you were talking, and I was thinking we need like a deck of playing cards that has like these things underneath. It's like employee retention, like you have these different outcomes that you can pull out. It is, I think one of the things is sometimes maybe people overthink this a bit. Some of the outcomes are universal. They're fairly common. Just knowing how to articulate them. And like you said, kind of studying the customer a bit, like how do finance people and operations people think? What are the words that they're using? I think a lot of frustration or pain points, when I talk to business side people, so we try to talk to, sort of talent and the business side, is it comes across as people will talk about slowness as one thing. They don't know how to articulate. They just go, we're not moving fast enough. And I would say that can be deconstructed into your sort of talent language, or the language of skills. But it's a very common one, especially in the world of things changing all the time, is we're not moving fast enough to seize this opportunity. That if you hear that, your ears should perk up and you should say, okay, I can figure out how to break that down and bring it back to something that we know how to do. But that is an immediate signal that you should jump in when you hear that language. I would say that's a cue.
Yes, listen for those things, and part of the value that we bring is listening to the problems and filtering that through the human lens of, we have access to the greatest investment and resources company has, which is the people. How do we tie that thing they're talking about back to a people thing, a lever we can pull on this side to try to make an impact there? I'm going to tell a story in a few minutes, a case study about a company that struggled with that slowness, as you put it, that just, we can't quite move fast enough to hit the goals we have as a business. And they eventually turn around and realize that, well, the people are the limitation here. And I'll get into more details of that and how it works in a minute. But I love pointing that out. I love how you pointed that piece of it out, because that is a true cost to this. Even if we don't see what the cost is, the cost of a missed opportunity, the cost of they had the idea and they got it out and they executed faster than we could. There is a cost to those things, although in the moment it's sometimes hard to calculate. There is a cost. One of the things that I've seen in the research, I can't remember the research organization that put this stat out, but they put out some data around the cost of having unclear data in your organization. And again, it's one of those things, kind of a catch-all. Like, if you don't have clear and accurate data, you can never make the decisions you need to make in time, at the right moments, with the right resources, with the right knowledge. You're making it based on half of the information that you need. And I always take that and apply it back to this conversation on skills to say that also has to have a cost. If it costs you something because you don't have the right sales data, or you don't have the right market data, or if it costs you something to miss out on that, it costs you something to miss out on that internal data from your people as well. So speaking of, one last thing. So my background, the last job that I had in HR was for a government contractor. We were an engineering firm, engineering training services. And one of the things that our leaders looked at on a regular basis. When we had our metrics meetings and I'm reporting on turnover and headcount and all those other kind of HR metrics, they're reporting, all of our program managers are reporting on the risk. These are the things that are going on. We're green here, we're red there. We need to figure out how to mitigate this. So they're always looking at that through that lens of, when we make this decision, is it going to increase our risk or decrease our risk? Because there's very few can do one or the other. And I look at this bigger conversation that Henry and I are having, for all of you out there listening in. This conversation also has risk. Waiting, holding off, deciding that we're not going to do anything this year or maybe next year. Every time we push that out a little bit, there is some risk to that. Whether it's the risk of a missed opportunity, as we kind of pointed out already, or it's the risk of we have to do something tomorrow and we don't know what we have within the business to be able to do that. So we're going to go out there and hire, and you find out that you had people already after you've hired them because they got mad and quit because you didn't tap into them. You hired someone outside the business and brought them in for a higher pay scale these days, your pay inflation. So all these different factors that fit into this. I said earlier, everything has 25 variables, it feels like, but I love bringing this conversation of risk about. If someone is still opposed after all the things that Henry and I were talking about a minute ago, different levers we can pull, different things that your leaders care about, if none of those resonate with them, coming back with we are trying to manage the risk that is facing our organization. If we don't address this, we are intentionally increasing the risk that we're at for when something comes and we're not able to respond quickly enough to it. So that's a big focus. And Henry, you spend your days in managing programs and managing these kind of things. And so I don't know if you talk about risk quite as often as my friends and peers did back in that world, because that was their language that they thrived on. But I have to imagine that there is an element of risk when we decide not to do something or we decide not to step in that direction. Don't you agree?
Yeah, 100%. I think about like what kinds of risk that, let's say, skills and having a handle on skills helps you mitigate. And one of those is just a theme that I couldn't keep repeating any more than I have. I mean, it's so important, which is the lesson of the pandemic, and that is have reserve capacity in your organization to be able to deal with change. We look at the supply chain problem and we look at company transformation. There's a tendency to want to make everything so efficient that you have only one of each thing. And what ends up happening is when you lose a lot of people or when a pandemic comes along and you have to make unfortunate choices for financial reasons, you end up not realizing what you've lost if you don't have a way to quantify it. And you end up with single points of failure and knowledge silos. And being able to actually map that out. The classic thing is when you think about something like succession, there's a risk of loss variable in there. Well, is that just the manager kind of making something up? Or is there a tangible way to say, this is the last person we have that can do X, or that knows these sort of things, or all the people who built this or have left the organization voluntarily. Can you know what that cost is? When people are leaving, are you losing institutional knowledge, or do you have backups and redundancy built into your system? So even being able to get a view of what's going on there is really tough, and that's one of the big lessons that companies have thrived during the pandemic. They have enough reserve capacity that they can kind of pivot. They can take a hit to the side of the ship, and they can keep going.
That reminds me, when you say it that way, if someone leaves and we lose whatever they had, I was way back in college. I remember we had an assignment to read about the Tennessee Valley Authority, the TVA here. I'm in North Alabama. I don't think I mentioned that earlier, but here in North Alabama, back during the Great Depression, they set up the TVA as a way to get people back to work. And the story I remember reading was this problem happened one day, and everybody just says, okay, who's our person to solve that? And no one raises their hand. And finally, they figure out that the one guy who knows how is out that day. And it causes them all to kind of freak out a little bit and realize we are this close to major issues, major problems, if we don't do something to address it. So they started some apprenticeship things. They started some informal learning things where people are paired up and all that kind of stuff. But that moment where they realized we have one person that knows how to fix that problem, and it was a major issue. They had to bring him in from his vacation day to try to fix this. And suddenly it was this big eye-opening moment for the entire organization. So this idea that Henry and I are sharing here, for those of you out there, this isn't a new thing. It's not like it just suddenly happened. I would argue in the last year, it's probably, as Henry was saying, probably increased the urgency around it somewhat. But this idea that we have single points of failure, that we have one person who is the go-to person for that thing, there's something wrong with that. But if we don't know who those people are, that's when the problem comes in. Because we don't know what things that person's great at. And if they leave, we assume they were whatever their job title is. We don't realize that they were also these other 4 things in the organization. They were informal leaders in these other areas, or they were, whenever someone had a question about how to solve this unique kind of problem, they were always the go-to person because they had the reputation of solving those things. But none of those things were in their actual job description, so we missed out on that. So love that. And I want to tell you that story I mentioned a minute ago, and give you some insight into a company we've been talking to that was struggling with some of these things. And that slowness idea that Henry mentioned earlier really fits in here well. So this company has tens of thousands of employees. They're based in North America, and they were struggling mightily because they had decided to start this digital transformation project. So they were building these specific teams across the business and embedding them into different business units, almost like a embedded business partner in HR, but they were embedding these certain types of digital skills in other areas of the business. And they had a set goal to build 10 of these teams and kind of apply them, immobilize them as needed whenever a new area popped up or whenever it was time to move to the next phase of the project. And they started off with a bang. Everyone's excited. They could not wait because they had these big visions for the outcomes they were going to achieve. And after they built the second or third team, everything went full stop. And so that's the point of talking to their leaders, trying to understand what's going on, because they'd reached out asking for some help. And it turned out that their problem was they had tapped on all of the people that they knew by name for the skills that they had. And once they exhausted that short list of people, that they couldn't rely on someone's job title, or they couldn't rely on these informal networks anymore because they had exhausted all the people they knew that had the certain skills they needed. So they were going to try to hire from outside, but that wasn't in the budget for the plan. They were supposed to be taking and repurposing existing employees. So that was going to kind of break the ROI models they'd already put out there. And they were trying to figure out how to solve for this. And ultimately, it all came down to, if we had to boil this entire multi-million-dollar project down to one thing that caused the issue, was they didn't understand or see the clarity of the skills of their people beyond their current job title. And when I actually pressed them, I said, you have 80% of your employees walking around right now, you're paying them, they're working on projects, and beyond their current job title, you can't tell me anything else about them. And they agreed with that statement. So that's again, a concerning place to be in general, the risk and all the other things we talked about. But for them, it was just oh yeah, we'll get to that someday, until it hit them square between the eyes when they were trying to roll up this company-wide project, and it failed because they weren't able to find the right skills inside the business to solve for that. So that's a negative, or not a fun story. Henry, I don't know if you have a positive spin that you could throw my way, or a positive story that you could share, but I'd love to. Lift me up here, buddy. Lift me up here.
Yeah. Probably one of the coolest stories that we've heard lately, and some of you may have already heard this, was the story shared during our latest convergence from one of our pioneer customers. And they have a finance organization. A bunch of people were looking for kind of career guidance, and one of the challenges is that the organization really wasn't growing or changing enough for sort of the natural career progression. I always think, like, go to Glassdoor and look at the career growth score that you've got. That's kind of the index. Yeah. If you're looking at how people are feeling within a particular group. What they were able to do was, using our system, they were able to go and map out a whole kind of set of ways to grow in place, but also ways for people to level up without necessarily having huge org changes or management responsibilities or anything like that. And some of it was perception, but it was a lot of just the organization coming in and providing these resources where people could go in. It created a custom kind of career exploration experience built around skills and different models for critical skills to build within kind of FP&A. And they used the kind of the building blocks of what we have. And what you see is all of a sudden employee engagement shoots up. You see people are taking proactive measures. Some people are getting title changes without necessarily, like I said, changing the org structure as a whole. So it was really just everybody up-leveling who they were. And ultimately, at the end of the day, part of it is showing your people that you care about this proactively, sort of not waiting for it to become an issue, but creating an environment where they feel supported, guided, and the structure is in place where it's super clear. These are things you can get better at, where the company will notice, and where you will grow and you will benefit. We're going to make it really obvious what the scorecard looks like and put it in your hands. So it's cool. We'll share, hopefully in the show notes or something, we can share a link to that recording because I had a lot of fun watching it. So
that sounds incredible. And what I love about that is you and I have talked for 40 minutes now about the value to the audience we're talking to, right? That persona of HR talent, learning leader. We talked about the value to the business, but we haven't really talked about the value to the individual employee. You talked about being engaged, being connected. And I kind of hinted at it very early on about understanding the skills of your people and those kind of things. But one of the things we saw in our data is we all say we want to engage and connect with our people. We want them to be fired up and ready for whatever the world throws at them and go at the world on our behalf as employers. But we found in the data that there's a fraction of employees, about 1 in 5, that say, I have no idea if my managers in my company have any clue what my skills actually are. I have no idea if they know what I can do. And if you're one of those people who isn't really aware of that, how can we ever expect the person to be excited about their job if they don't think we're excited about what they can do? So there's some evidence out there that says we can do a better job of this, that we can make sure our people know we're paying attention to their strengths, we're paying attention to their skills, and we're caring a lot about that. And I love the story there, Henry, because the company is showing them with that spotlight on the skills, the conversations around that, enabling them to talk about it without feeling like they're going out on a limb or putting themselves at risk from a career perspective, to talk about what skills should I be developing or what's next for me or how can I. No, they're giving them the tools to have those better conversations. That's a really powerful place to be. All right. So we talked a lot about skills. We've talked a lot about all those kind of things. And we briefly mentioned AI earlier, but not very much. And so I want to take a second here and really talk about the value of this. I'm going to give you a quick example of an experiment we actually ran. Lots of research we do, a lot of survey work, but we got to run experiments about 18, 24 months ago. That was so much fun. It's so amazing to see the insights there because I was curious if AI was better than us as humans at certain types of talent practices. And so we actually had, we gathered 1,000 responses from North American workers, like a survey. How are you feeling about your work? Are you stressed? What's your manager relationship look like? Things like that. And we took that data and gave it to a bunch of consultants and said, okay, tell us what's going on. We have a 1,000-person company, right? Tell us what's going on in our company. Tell us what our priorities should be. And they came back with these broad things like, well, 80% of your people are disengaged, or 40% have stresses with their manager. But it was kind of big picture. There was no real detail about what to do next. Like, try to solve all manager problems. We've been trying to do that for years. Good luck. Then we took all that data and we passed it through an algorithm. And it was able to come back and say, hey, for the women who have small children, these are their priorities, versus someone who's single, who works in engineering. These are the things they care about. This is their struggles. This is their stresses. And we were able to get really specific and in-depth information that we could then act on from that research, from that experiment. What I love about that is it proved that in some cases, AI, machine learning, what do you want to call it, it's better than us as Henry said earlier, at analyzing and really sifting through the data and finding the trends and helping us figure out what those commonalities are among groups. AI is really, really great at those things, but it's not going to then decide what's next. It's not going to step in and say, okay, now let's coach our leaders. Now let's help our employees. It's not doing those things. That's where we get a chance to step in. I love the barbell example earlier, Henry. We talked about it's good at this, it's good at that. But there's other things though, other places for us to step in, other places where we can add value or use that information to make a better or a faster decision instead of kind of throwing up our hands or doing guesswork. We actually use some of that data, as you were saying, to help us decide what to do next.
Yeah, one of the like things I heard one time about AI that stuck with me was AI is also really good at being in the room when it would be inappropriate for a human to be in the room. So if you think about, like, I was kind of joking, like somebody practicing pronunciation on Duolingo and they're nervous, and AI can tell you, like, you're that French word you're saying that sounds terrible, or whatever, work on this little thing. I think of so many little cases where whether it's using the software you use on a day-to-day basis or things like Grammarly, you're typing and you notice the little grammatical errors. And could you even imagine the cost and the awkwardness of inserting humans into these situations? So I think, like, AI has this special kind of frame of references that it's sort of allowed to be in this private space where it can coach you, or it can like listen to a person in a private kind of confidential context and provide back insight or capture that data for later use in a way that, like, humans are just not allowed in that space. So that's one of those interesting themes I'm going to be paying attention to more and more, is like where AI is kind of allowed in the room.
I love the example of that. It's a funny way in some cases to think about some of those kind of things, but it's a great visual of this is where it fits and this is maybe where it doesn't, where it might not be as applicable. So we actually had a question just come in. I think it's perfectly timed, because we're going to transition to the last slide we've got, and then we'll jump into some questions and stuff. And I think it's a good segue from this, because I wanted to take a minute and talk about why. And hopefully all of you by now have bought into this. You agree, you understand why Henry and I believe so strongly in the idea of layering AI on top of this skills data so that we can make better decisions, so it can give us insights into our people, those kind of things. But then the question comes, okay, what do we do next? If you agree with everything we've shared, what do we do next? And so I would love to get some insights from you, Henry, on this one. I have some ideas as well. But talk about what it takes to go from, I'm invested in this, I'm trying to pitch this to my leadership, they say yes, it's like a dog catching a car. Now what do I do? Would you mind talking about that just a little bit, some of the practical steps and some of the next things to do how to actually realize the value out of this?
Yeah, it can definitely be a little intimidating when you're sitting here thinking about all this. Okay, where do we start? This is a lot. We thought about this question and we talked to hundreds of customers, and our thought leadership and advisory services, sometimes called TLAS here at Cornerstone, developed what we call a skills maturity model. And what it does is it maps out the types of actions and activities that you should take depending on where you're at. Right. So the initial kind of piece of it often is just gathering a baseline of data, getting some only critical skills for the organization, and your job descriptions, kind of wrangling those as the starting point. And then as you progress up that maturity model, you get into things like aligning the roles to skills and learning to skills, coming up with a kind of a rough job architecture or structure for your career paths. And as you move further along, you see these different kinds of activities that bring talent management together using AI, all of these different pieces. We actually do a workshop. So for Cornerstone customers, we do a workshop, talk to your account manager or your customer success representative, and they can hook you up and route you in the right direction. But we lay out this kind of plan, and what it's based on is universal needs. We see the same patterns, right? At the fanciest level, when you get to the highest level, everybody's doing something a little bit different because they have a different industry or a different company size or different challenge. But at the foundational level, it's a lot of the main questions that you should be asking, and that's what are the skills of our people? Can we gather that one end of the barbell, the kind of cheap and efficient AI inference of it, and then work our way up the confidence ladder and start to go from there? Can we get a handle on the catalog and training that we have, and understanding, are we even close to addressing the needs of our people? Based on global data, what should we have? What are the best in class companies in the world? What are the skills that they're working on within our industry? And these are all things that technology providers can help you with today. But yeah, that would be my recommendation for the Cornerstone customers is take a look at our maturity model and the skills workshops. Those have a ton of value to add and been very well received. I think over 100 companies have gone through that program now.
I think going back to some of the things we talked about earlier, looking for those questions your people are asking, your other leaders are asking inside the business, or other things that are priorities for the company. If their focus is digital transformation, do we understand the digital skills of our people? And trying to tie some things back to questions around skills, those will give you some starting points. Okay, when we're trying to go down this path, this is the outcome we're looking for. It could just be, as you said, Henry, like a broader, we want to get some insight into what our people have. We just want to ask that question and get an answer back that we feel comfortable with. We want to understand, we want to be able to confidently say we understand the skills of 90+% of our people. Right? That's an easy place to start. If you don't know where else to go, it's an easy place to start, because then that starts to enable all those other kinds of things we talked about. So having some of those questions, understanding what success looks like, I think that's a really good place to be. Okay. So we had some other questions that actually came in as people were registering. And so I have those over here. I'm going to go through those. I'll take a crack at them, but I'm also going to pass them to you, Henry, if you're good with that. I'm going to take your complete and total agreements that the easy questions go to me and any hard questions are going to go to you. So we'll keep that 100% fair. So someone asked, can AI be used in upskilling and in aiding learning? And there's actually two parts to the question. And the second part of it is, what do you see as the role of AI in culture and behavior change? And I want to tap that last piece, I think, first, because the example I gave a minute ago of that experiment we ran, AI could help us identify and pinpoint the problems and the challenges and the issues, but it wasn't going to actually go in there and solve for any of those challenges. It could help us decide where to take the next step. And that's the value of it, I would argue, is it helps us to decide, instead of trying this peanut butter spread approach where we try an intervention across the entire population because we know some people need it, but we don't know which one. If 1 out of 3 people need this intervention, we don't know which 1 out of 3. So we give everybody the same thing, which is a waste of resources. So AI can help us to pinpoint where to spend our time, where to invest our efforts, where to target those things. And because the question said behavior change, I always smile, because of all the things that we get to do from a talent perspective, the things we have to do from a talent perspective, all of those things, behavior change is the absolute hardest thing of all, because there are entire industries set up to help people change their behaviors about certain things and certain actions and certain whatever else. And so that's the hardest thing we have to do. The good thing is, this can help us actually have data to do that, instead of us feeling like we're making a judgment based on just what we see outwardly or what our guess is or some other kind of inferior measurement or choice. Henry, I'd love to kick the first part of that question back to you, if you don't mind, though. Can AI be used for upskilling and aiding in learning? I would imagine so.
Yeah, I mean, some of these are going to be things that are familiar. With the learning side, I think there's 2 big pieces from the administrator. It's just like, stop doing menial classification and organizational activity, data entry and data wrangling activities. It's 2021. Let's get the content automatically tagged, classified, and searchable for you without having to do the heavy lift. You get paid too much to spend time doing that. That's kind of a big piece on the learning side. There's another one, which is really the adaptive learning, and that's AI can help us know, what is that person's likely level early on, and is the content actually fit for them, or should they, spend more time in certain parts of the curriculum or the lesson? Do they that's a little bit more advanced, but actually targeting the right level of material and kind of spending more time in the right places is a huge piece of learning effectiveness. Otherwise, you just kind of have like a one-size-fits-all model for your training. So,
excellent. All right. So Heather had a really good question. She said, "Hey, I'm new to this whole AI thing," which many of us are, by the way. Not all of us are technology experts. I'm just an HR guy who loves software, so that's how I kind of blended over into it, Heather. But she said, what types of input data are available or are being used by employers to try to train some of these models? How are we getting it smart in order to help us make these decisions, essentially, to paraphrase her question a little bit, because she's like, I'm not sure what data I would use to start feeding that algorithm and making it smarter. And so one of the easy ways to do that, one of the places that I've seen companies do that, is to start with, we have this data on our people. We can, as I mentioned earlier, we can ask them to kind of self-report things. We can also look at the resumes that they have, look at what jobs they've had in the past, to kind of pull those kind of things together so we can create this picture of what they've done. It's not always 100% accurate, as we pointed out earlier, but at least it gives you something to start with beyond their current job title. Henry, I'd love to hear from you on
training activity. Yeah, all the learning and training activity they've got. If you have a history of performance reviews, there's things to learn from that raw data. What companies often do they don't necessarily start with the whole org as one big challenge. They focus on, this is where I think it tends to work well, is they focus on like our support organization. We're going to go in and like use Zendesk or Salesforce. We're going to understand and map out expertise and stuff based on tickets and activity that people have done. Or sales teams, we need to match people to the right types of accounts, and we need cross-training, and we need shadowing and that sort of thing. Or we need people to be able to spar and work on objection handling. So let's figure out, like, based on the data in our system of work, how do we solve this bounded problem for a specific business customer? Being a resource like that, where you are seeing an example here at Cornerstone, we were going from our own hosted environments for servers to AWS. Big digital transformation, talent transformation, super focused kind of problem. HR and talent has a very key role in that. The customer knows how to ask what they need to ask, and they know how to measure it pretty well. But the AI and skills piece comes in as a support resource for that group. So I think oftentimes you're building it piece by piece, and you kind of listen as a talent leader. You listen for like which groups in the organization have this articulation that looks like a solution that I can help with.
You mentioned the cards earlier. You remember that? We talked about like having the playing cards. Yeah. I can't reach them without going off camera, but about 6 feet to my left over here, I have a pair of dice that I use in some workshops and things. And one of them has all these levers we can pull in HR and talent, like training, like compensation, like hiring. And the other one has all these business problems. As you were saying, like listening for those issues, it has business problems like customer service, product quality, competitiveness in the market, like things like that. And so I would have someone roll those both and say, okay, how do we connect hiring to customer service as an issue? Maybe we start screening for that in the hiring process and just get people thinking about that bigger picture like you're talking about here, listening for those cues from other places. I would double down for sure. Ditto on your comment about pick a thing, though. This isn't let's try to throw it all at once, because then it becomes too big to wrap your arms around, and you need to solve specific problems with this. That's one of the things I write about a lot in my book on this topic, is I talk about we need to be looking at this through the lens of use cases, specific problems. So Heather, great question. Thank you for asking that one. One of the other ones we got was from someone that said, hey, any insight on hourly workers, how to use AI as a way to engage them and create better retention and growth? And I'll take first crack at that one, because I feel we have such an opportunity with that. And I'm actually going to take a page from our mutual friend, Henry Ike, who's over another Cornerstone leader over there. One of the things he said to me a few months ago that is stuck in my head is he said, we assume that options means personalization. We assume that giving someone access to 1,000 courses means that suddenly it's tailored and personalized, and it's not, because then it's just essentially the same as someone walking into a library and seeing 1,000 books on the shelves and saying, yeah, but where do I start? And so AI can help us by personalizing and tailoring that. Maybe it looks at all of the people who are in customer service positions and says, hey, they take the people who level up or who have better performance scores, they take these 3 courses before they take these other courses. And so the system sees that and starts recommending some of those pieces of content because other people who are high performers in that role start using that. That's not just growth, but that's also performance as well. And if we can help someone grow, we can help their performance, and we can retain them, that's like compound interest on a great employee. That's what I love to call it anyway. And so I don't know if you have anything there, Henry, to add to that around how to kind of connect with them. But I think the personalization piece on the learning content is probably a really key factor there.
Yeah, I think some of the lessons that we've learned are, and I talk to some of my product managers about this, is that you have different kinds of personalization, and one of them is context. So if you think about this, if you pull up Netflix when you're on your phone versus you pull it up when you're in your living room, should you see the same things? If you're on Wi-Fi or if you're on LTE, should you see the same things? The answer is no, right? If you're out on the go and you're not sitting down in your living room, you're not going to watch a 2-hour episode of a show, right? You're gonna watch like something much smaller and more contextual. And so the lesson oftentimes with blue collar or hourly employees is that context is quite a bit different. They're not necessarily sitting at a computer. The time that they have, the modality, it needs to be a little bit more push based. They can't be, it's sort of maybe do a little bit more spoon feeding and a little bit more bite-sized type stuff. Think about mobile. Think about how much are they going to be able to interact and engage with something in a two-way manner versus an office or desk employee. These little nuances make a big difference. The big thing that I'm excited about in the future, or as we're moving forward, is more learning through doing. Little practice and little on-the-job things. It's not necessarily going to be always about watching videos, but little tips and then things you can apply. We're working with a food service company, and they were delivering kind of like micro training in this format on mobile, and it was basically a tiny little bit of content, and then go do this thing and go practice this thing for the rest of the day and work on this in the job. And I was like, that's really cool. That's very different for a blue collar employee. You can just, they're working in a fast food restaurant. So you got to think creatively.
Awesome. I love that. And we're getting the sign on our end that it's time to wrap up. I apologize. I'm having so much fun on the questions. We appreciate all of you for joining us, for sharing your questions, for asking. There's even some jokes in the chat or in the Q&A earlier. I appreciate all of that. Henry, thank you so much for your time, and I'm going to pass it back over to Chelsea so she can wrap us all up.
Thanks.
Yes. Thank you so much, Ben and Henry. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, and we weren't able to get to all of the questions, but we will be sure to follow up with everyone individually to make sure your question was answered. So if you have any additional questions, feel free to email me at cmolnar@csod.com. And on behalf of the speakers and myself, we would like to thank you for taking the time to attend this webinar, and a reminder that the recording will be emailed to you later this week, I'd say within the next 48 hours or so. So thanks so much for everyone who attended, and have a great rest of your day.